All right. Hey, everyone. Thank you for joining us. And if you were here for our technical difficulties, thank you for sticking through it. So, we're going to monitor, see how the stream connection goes. Should be okay, but I have been having a bit of internet issues. So, we will check and track that. So, thank you for joining us in this episode of Mission Briefing. I'm excited for this, especially. I am not super familiar with Federation. I know, surprising. I'm a dev advocate for Apollo. But yeah, I'm not very familiar with Federation other than like how to do the very basics of it, set up an API gateway, and even then, still, it's just magic to me. So I'd be happy to have Michael here, Michael Watson, and I'll let you introduce yourself, but hopefully you're going to distill a little bit of that magic for us, all right?
Yeah, of course. I'm here to shake away all the magic.
Yeah.
But yeah, my name is Michael Watson. I'm a solutions architect at Apollo. So I work with all of our customers really on their federated graph implementations and how to set things up with managed federation.
Awesome. Very cool. Yeah, and so we're going to take a look at managed federation, what that means, how we would go about setting that up. And yeah, I guess like without further ado, we might as well just go ahead and dive in. Does that sound good to you?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Oh, awesome. All right. So what is I mean, well, I guess the first step is like we need graphs, right? We need like something that we want to join together. Is that a good first step?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I guess as a first step of setting managed federation up, we kind of almost assume that you have a federated graph already working, and you're probably using something like service list inside of the Apollo Gateway constructor. Now, one of the things about service list is you're essentially having the gateway start up using introspection queries at each one of those URLs you define inside of it. So sometimes you might have a downstream service that
Yeah.
isn't available. And when the gateway starts up, it can't fully compose its schema. So Managed Federation uses a schema registry that Apollo provides and allows us to create configuration files that enable the gateway to start up without relying on introspection.
Ah,
There's a lot more
interesting.
details to it than that,
Right.
but yeah.
Yeah, okay. And I see because the graph is in the registry, it doesn't have to do that like real-time introspection. Because I guess it can look at the graph that's available through the registry and what it says there and build the gateway through that. Is that correct?
Yeah. So essentially, you're going to be pushing every individual downstream service into that registry. And every time you push in a new schema into that registry, we do some things like composition validation.
Right.
Does the entire graph compose? And if all that passes, then we create a configuration file and place that into cloud storage that your gateway instances can now update with that
Got
new
it.
configuration.
Got it. Okay, cool. And for anyone who is not familiar, could you just give a quick update on what exactly is API Gateway?
Yeah, of course. So the Apollo Gateway is really actually it's an open source package inside of our Apollo server repo. So if you went to github.com/Apollo GraphQL/Apollo server, it's in one of the packages inside of there.
Okay.
Really, it's Apollo server running in a different configuration, and it's meant to orchestrate multiple federated downstream servers. And that would be servers that are providing a schema that meets the Apollo Federation specification.
Got it. Okay, cool. Okay, so I mean, I think that gives me like a pretty good overview. And again, if you're in the chat and you have questions, please feel free to drop them into the chat, and I will try to surface those whenever we hit like a convenient stopping point. All right, so we know what the goal is now. We need to take some graphs, get them into the registry, and then from there, that's going to generate our config file that our API gateway can use to declare what the graph, the full composited, composed graph is. Is that? Yeah. All
Correct.
right, cool. Yes. Da, da, da. Just want to make sure I'm soaking this in. All right, so what's the first
You
step?
got it. So the first step, I actually sent you a GitHub URL
Yes.
that's
Yeah.
got a project, and that project is actually a gateway instance that is using that service list. And so
Okay.
it has 4 predefined services that are hosted on Heroku that we'll be able to use for our
Got
example
it.
today.
Okay, so I think what I'll do instead of working through GitHub is I'll clone it down, open it up in VS Code, and then we take a look from there. Does that make sense? Does that sound
Yep,
good?
I
Cool.
think that makes perfect
All
sense.
right, awesome. So I've already got this. So we'll call this, I don't think I'll have a naming collision, but yeah, no. Okay, cool. Um, Managed walkthrough, open in code. Cool.
Nice.
All right, so now we've got this open. So let's see. Later, we will update later.
I just got that today too.
All
Yeah, let's open up the index file.
right, let me blow
So
this
this
up
is
for everyone at home a little bit. There we go.
So this project right here, it's really just the code for the gateway instance.
Okay.
So if you're working with Apollo Federation or have already started to play around with it, this is how you would interact with the various schemas that you want to compose together. You provide a name and a URL.
Okay.
Now, this is what we're going to be pushing into the registry so that we can remove this service list and configure the gateway to point at that configuration file.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, cool. And so then in this, again, this is a gateway, and a gateway really is like a server, I guess, Apollo server. And we're specifying here's our gateway, which we've defined here. All right. Awesome. We could do some authentication stuff, it looks like. So we're
Yep,
checking
just
for,
like you would do anything with a monolithic
yeah.
Apollo server instance, you can put all of that into your gateway. Plugins, context function creation stuff for authentication.
Got it.
I even have that little example of the remote GraphQL data source
Yeah.
that you can define. So when
Yeah.
you build that URL, you might want to send specific headers to that service or something.
Oh, I see here. Okay. Very cool. All right. Wow. This is neat. So honestly, this is like further than I've gone with Gateway. So there's a lot of really cool nuggets in here. This is cool. All right. So now I understand that. So yeah, we've got this. So the next step is to get this into the registry. Is this correct? Is there any other files we should look at?
Yep. So this is all we need to look at for right now.
Mm-hmm.
I think one thing that actually might be a good thing to pop up, just in case anyone hasn't seen a federated schema before, why don't you open up that reviews dash schema GraphQL file?
Yeah, actually, funny you mentioned that because I don't think outside of like the docs I've ever looked at a federated schema myself. So yeah, let's do that.
Yeah. So there's a couple key things inside of the federation specification. There's a set of directives, some other things defined around entities and services, and really it's what is utilized by the gateway's internal query plan builder, which means every GraphQL request coming in, we have to build a query plan of how that's going to be executed across those services, and that's based on what's defined in the Apollo Federation specification.
Got it.
So you can see we have this like @ key on that review type, and it has this field's ID.
Yeah.
Our review service is actually exposing the review type, and that @ key directive enables us to have a different service query into it based off of that key field.
Got it.
Those key
Okay.
fields are typically foreign primary key references you find throughout your graph,
Right.
but they're owned by different teams.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it's essentially the way to draw relationships to external entities, meaning that they're in a different schema defined somewhere else. But like, hey, this property is how we identify this entity. Okay, that's very cool.
Right.
Yeah.
And inside of our resolvers, I don't have that example here, but we essentially have a special resolver that we define that gets called when the gateway executes a request through its query plan to that downstream service.
Okay.
Um, that gets called with that ID property. So it's kind of like, hey, if you want to find a review in this example, I can find you a review if you provide me this key field.
Got it. Got it.
And you can have multiple key fields too. You know, this is one example. You can also have composite key fields that work off of, multiple or even nested fields.
Got it. So you could do like, I don't know, like usernames might not be unique. Like actually Discord is like this. Usernames aren't unique, but there's also like a 4 or 5 digit like ID associated with that. And then it's like you combine those two together and that's the unique key. And like that could be your composite key in this case, like the username plus code or whatever.
Yep.
Okay.
Or even thinking of like, taking an example from, the API key we're going to copy in just a minute.
Yeah.
At Apollo, we define our API keys with like user : username : a key.
Yeah.
You can kind of see how that's a composite makeup of 3 distinct things.
Yeah. Like service, this, and then some other thing or something. Yeah. That's
Exactly.
Cool. All right. Awesome.
Yeah. And the really nice thing is this allows like each team to define their types of what's going to be in the overall schema. And the example right below that, you see the extend type user. The user type is defined in the account service. And so we're actually able to extend off of that, provide what's the external information from that service that we might want. So we're actually adding the username in here.
Okay.
So that means when the gateway makes its requests and sends the data to each one of these downstream services, it's going to send the ID and the username from the account service to this call to get whatever those reviews are.
Got it. And that's because we specify them as external, so it knows that it's going to look off of type user, and it's going to use that ID, that field, to do the reconciliation for the correct user from the accounts resolver, and then with that information it can have its own, I guess, resolver for reviews, right? And now the ID is available, the username is available, and then you can look up the reviews. Lovely.
Exactly.
Lovely.
Yep. So you get a nice separation of concerns between teams, right? I'd want to add more information to this, but I don't want to rewrite everything.
Oh, this is great. And now even the name makes so much more sense to me. Reviews schema. Like this is a schema for reviews, like of a given thing. Got it.
We'll use this file later on when we're pushing into that registry, because you have the option of pushing local files or introspecting an endpoint and having that be registered.
Gotcha. All right. Okay. Very cool. Okay. Awesome. So we've got like a schema, we've got a gateway. What's the next step here? What do we want to do next to bring this all together?
So now we should go into Studio and create our first graph that we're going to start publishing everything towards.
Awesome. So do that, studio.apollo.graphql.com. Well, it's automatically jumping in here because this is the last place I was at, but I'm going to copy this URL. So for anyone who might be wanting to check out Studio and what we're talking about, this is where you go now. It was previously Apollo Graph Manager, and now very recently renamed to Apollo Studio.
Very recently.
Yeah. Okay, so should I create a new organization from here?
Yeah, why don't we create a new organization to test all this out?
Okay, and I'm going to call this Managed Federation. But it probably needs to be unique, right?
It does. Have someone on the stream that might take the name right as you're making it.
Yeah, right. There you go. Okay, so there we go. Boom. We've got it. We'll do the free plan for now. Later, I'll try the 14-day free trial. I can skip this. I'll do this later. But I could have invited you if I wanted to real quick right then. You can invite teammates before you even start. So now we want a new graph, right? That's the next step. We want to get this graph in here. So let's do this. New graph. Graph name, we'll call this Managed. Oh, that's right. This is going to be Managed Federation. Now, is this going to be one of the individual graphs, or is this for our gateway? So like I'm only asking because I don't want to be like managed federation gateway,
Yeah,
and then we do
totally.
like reviews.
Yeah,
uh,
no, this is a great question, and honestly, they think this is one thing we're trying to do a little bit better with how like you get into the product and get into this, because there definitely can be a little confusion here. So inside of what we're creating here, we're only going to create one graph for a gateway, and essentially how metrics, how the schemas works. Each one of those downstream services will register their own schemas, and they'll also publish the traces to the gateway, and the gateway will orchestrate that and send them
got
all
it.
together.
Got
So
it.
we only need one
So
graph inside of Apollo Studio.
amazing. So okay. So then yeah, I would call this. I mean, I probably wouldn't choose the name gateway for, but I think it's good for here for now. Okay, cool. Um,
Honestly, most of our customers that I work with, I would say most of them put gateway in
do they?
their name.
All
It's actually,
right.
yeah, it's actually pretty common.
All right. Look at me.
You're you're just doing it like everyone
Yeah,
else.
that's what I like. All right, cool. All right, so we've got that. Yeah, so we definitely want to make sure that we have engine report schema on. So this is telling us, oh, so this is my key too, which I'll
So
get rid of later.
this is
But
actually yeah,
yeah.
this is actually where things can be a little confusing.
Ooh, do
So
tell.
you notice how there's that little note that says to register a federated schema, see federation.
Oh, got him.
This is the trick, everyone. Yeah. So we recently just released automatic schema reporting, but that only works for monolithic schemas currently.
Oh, that's right.
We are working on it. Think about it like this. You don't want your server necessarily automatically reporting the schema from its startup. Maybe you want that, but every time it does that, that's going to create a new configuration that's going to
Yeah,
update what gateway instances. So you don't
yeah,
want a developer to accidentally, run a federated server
for
locally,
sure.
but the wrong environment
Yeah,
and it automatically. So there's a little bit more thought that's going to go in and change how that API works
that
at the
makes
federated
sense.
level specifically.
Yeah,
So we have to use CLI commands or integrate with our API to register that schema for each one of those services.
got it. Okay, so is it safe to say then I have the key, so then we're done with this step for right now, or do I need to
Yep.
follow this link, or are you gonna just walk me through that?
Yeah, you can follow that link.
Okay.
I definitely recommend it for everyone. There's a lot of good details and nuggets in there, but we're
Yeah.
going to walk through essentially that process right now.
Okay, good. So, well, then here's what I did. I shared it in the chat. So, if anybody wants to read it, they can do that. They have access to it. But, I mean, I got you here with me. So, we're going to go right through it.
Let's do it.
All right. So, we've got
So,
this. Yeah, please.
yeah, so I think one question I was going to ask you, I noticed you popped your terminal up, and I think this is always a good question. Maybe anyone in the watching can also chime in. Do you ever use the terminal inside of VS Code, or do you typically have a terminal window on the side that you use?
The only time I use the terminal outside of VS Code is when I'm doing like what you just did, when I'm not already working within a project. So I
Cool.
normally
Right.
always go to VS Code. So like right now when we go back, like if we were to do any CLI commands, I would do it from VS Code because we're already working within that project. Yeah, I almost never use like the terminal app anymore and only do it through VS Code.
Yeah, same. Me too. I couldn't imagine going back. I'm a big power like VS Code user, so
Yeah,
uh, let's use
samesies.
VS Code terminal window for that then.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, so anyone in the chat, let me know. Do you use terminal like outside of VS Code still, or do you even use VS Code? I'd be interested to know. All right, so cool. So we've got our terminal. Boom. And I've got my key. So do I need to make an M file? Or are we going to create an Apollo config file?
Yeah, so there's a couple options of what you want to do here. So if you create a .env file and you
Uh-huh.
put that Apollo key inside of there, you're going to have the Apollo CLI automatically configure with that key.
Okay.
So it's going to look for that .environment file, but there is also a -- key option in every CLI command that will run that you could also put that key in.
Got it.
Um, for our purposes here, I think it's easiest just to make a .env file, drop that in there, and then we don't have to add it to every CLI command.
Cool. I like it.
Um,
So we'll do that. Boom. We've got this. Oh, wait. Oops. Silly
Ah.
me. I forgot I copied the URL for
the chat, right?
yeah, for the chat. So I need to go back here and get this again.
Now here's one thing that I'd also add into here, because you know, we do have in our documentation about the Apollo config file for the server side of things. Now, just to talk to that really quickly, you'll notice this API key says service : manage federation. We have the concept of a service API key and a user API key inside of Graph Manager.
Right.
And we have plans in the future of, you know, accessibility controls, all these things based on your role, you know, all that stuff. But in today's world, a service key contains what that service ID is, that managed federation gateway that you just named your graph. Now, if you were using a user API key, that's where you're going to need to have that config file, and you're going to have that service name defined so we know
which
of
one
the graphs this user had. Exactly.
Got it. So because here we're using a service level key, it's very apparent what the service is. It's literally embedded in there. But with a user key, it could be any service, probably across any org that you're a member of. So
correct.
Yeah. Okay. There you have it, folks. Know your keys.
There's a lot of things you can do with that config file too.
Yeah.
There's a lot of other options, but at a minimum level, what we're talking about here, these are the gotchas of setting it up.
Yeah, I love setting up the Apollo. Anytime I'm using GraphQL in an app, I like to use the Apollo GraphQL extension, if nothing else, for the IntelliSense when I'm typing out my queries. And so,
absolutely.
Yeah, so I use the Apollo config file basically for every project that has GraphQL, just because if nothing else, I want to let it know where the schema is so that I can get IntelliSense going. If anyone is curious about what I just mentioned, if you look up on YouTube, there's a mission briefing episode I did with Jake Dawkins, and we went through how to configure the Apollo config file for basically every type of project that you could possibly have. So it's definitely worth checking out. But yeah, and it looks like we got WebStorm users in the chat more than anything else. So they're terminal WebStorm. So VS Code is out.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So no one go steal my service key and mess with my service until the stream is over and I can safely delete it. All right, cool. Yes. So we've got our service key. Yeah.
Yep. So now we can start running CLI commands using the Apollo CLI. Typically, what the command we're talking about here is actually called our service push. So why don't you type Apollo service push, and let's put a -- help on the end of that.
It's service : push, correct?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, correct. Service : push.
Yeah, no worries. And then -- what was that?
Help.
Oh, help.
Let's just pull up all the options in there real quick.
Yeah, for sure. Let's do that. Let's extend this a little bit. Let's take a look.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So there's a bunch of things you can do in here. And you can kind of see that there's options for like setting the graph ID. So if you were using a config file, there's a lot of different options inside of here. But I want to highlight a couple of them. One is the variant option. We're going to use this today. And the best way to think about this is like your graph running in different environments. So we'll do a dev and a production environment today.
Oh,
but
cool.
Whatever you have, right? Your graph's going to separate this out by not only its schemas, but also the metrics that are running in your different environments of your graph.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so cool. All right.
Yeah. And then there's also the endpoint and local schema file. And these are really the pointers to this is the schema that I want to push into the registry, whether it's a local file or that endpoint. Now, there's one little gotcha in here, and I think it's important to talk about this for like other GraphQL server implementations. So if you're using like Apollo Server and you have one of those federated schemas, um, when the server starts up, we add everything from the Apollo Federation specification. So if you open up GraphQL Playground, you see it all there. But if you're running a different implementation, depending on how your package is implemented, will depend on whether you're actually putting those decorations in the schema itself or actually having it delivered by the running server. And having the endpoint and the local schema file was really an option to uh, best fit whatever your team's needs are for your CI/CD pipeline.
Yeah.
Right? You might not be able to start up a node service in your pipeline
Right.
or whatever that might be. So the Apollo CLI, when it actually looks at a local schema file, and I think, for example, Ruby does this, there's an option to have it spit out the schema file,
Yep.
but the file it spits out has all the directives and everything from Federation defined. Our Apollo CLI, when we publish a schema, it assumes that those are not in there, and it's going to add them before it registers that schema.
Interesting.
So you might see a weird error. And the important thing to note is if you're registering a local schema file, you don't need any of those directives or anything like that.
Got it.
But when you're using the endpoint, it's going to introspect that endpoint. And whatever endpoint it's introspecting needs to have all of the Federation directive stuff defined. And that should be the case for all of your services. So most other GraphQL server implementations, the endpoint is typically what I find customers defaulting to just because it's easier to get that, since that's essentially having Federation running and working. And we have some links in our docs for the third-party packages out there.
Cool. So we got a question from the chat, which is, and maybe I can get some clarification from you on this, Wolf, but it's essentially, it's not clear to me if there are changes required to do in a federated server. And let me take a quick try at this, and you can feel free to tell me that was completely incorrect or add to it. And so I think there's two sides to this. One is the fact that there will be changes to your schema in most of your individual services, because you would have to add the proper directives to create those relationships between your gateway schema and the underlying services. So I think that there would be a change there. And if I remember correctly, you also mentioned that there's like custom resolvers that you would do to use certain lookups for federated fields, like if there is like a key field on like an entity. Is that correct? Did I get in the ballpark?
Yep. Yeah. You got it right on the head. So that's pretty much everything that's involved of taking a non-federated server and making it a federated server, or able to be federated. Now, as far as setting up managed federation, there are no changes you would need to make to that federated server. It's really every time that federated server is going to publish a new artifact into its environment, you're going to want to have it register its schema after it's available so that all gateway instances can update and start using that new service. There is a metrics configuration. So I mentioned how each one of the downstream services will send the metrics to the gateway, and the gateway aggregates that, and that's how we can see, this incoming request went across these different services. Now, that's just setting engine to true inside of Apollo server. Now, in the other implementations, there's, depending on what has it built in support, most of the ones that I've worked with my customers in the major implementations like Java, everything, they already have the pieces built in to report the traces up. So there really isn't anything except adding the package, adding the directives to your schema, and then if you're using Apollo server, just setting engine to true. And then everything else we're doing is CLI commands and configuration in the Apollo gateway instance.
Cool. Very cool. Oh, this is awesome. All right. Awesome. Very cool.
Perfect.
Yeah. Okay. So let's see here. Oh, right. So yeah. So we discussed what an endpoint is and what a local schema
Yep.
file is, and so I think we're ready to actually push this. Do we want to push the schema? Is that what the review schema
Yep.
is for? Okay.
That's what we're exactly going to do. But actually, before you push the reviews, let's do one push with some endpoints. So
Ooh.
flip
Oh,
over to
right.
the index file. And so, most teams are going to have this already if you've kind
Right.
of started playing around with Federation. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to do an Apollo service push command for each one of these.
Okay.
Now, there's going to be a couple options we need to provide.
Okay.
But that URL is going to be our endpoint that we're going to register.
Got it.
So let's do an Apollo service push for the accounts side.
Sounds good. All right. So I'm gonna say Apollo service push dash dash endpoint equal,
Yep.
and that's gonna be the URL.
Yep.
Did
And then there's a couple other things we need to put on it now.
I probably need quotes around
Um,
that? Do I need quotes around that?
I don't think so, actually. I
Cool.
think you're good.
All right.
And then we're going to need to provide essentially the service name, and that's
Right.
camel case with a capital N.
And we'll call this accounts.
Yep.
And
I
so
usually just keep it exactly the same.
that makes a lot of sense. Okay.
And then we're going to have a service URL where URL is all capital.
All right.
And that's going to be equal to the same thing as our endpoint.
Cool.
And let's talk about that for a second. The endpoint is the option of where it's going to introspect to get that schema and push into the registry. The service name and service URL are two of the three components that make up a managed federated gateways configuration. It's the service name and the service URL. Where are we going to send requests for that federated service? And then it's also going to be the slice of the schema. So that's how the gateway is able to compose itself without having to introspect those downstream services. It already has the piece of the schema, and then it just knows where to orchestrate the requests based off of all those directives and the query plan that it builds.
Got it. Okay, cool. So I think this is it, right? These are all the parameters we need for this one.
Now, before we actually publish this,
yeah,
one other little trick here, and I find it easiest. This is more of like a quick tip. When you start publishing your schemas, if you don't have variant defined, you're basically going to have it default to what's called our like current environment, which may be what you want if you only have one environment. But I typically find teams, they're going to start out in a dev environment and then they're going to promote it to production.
Yeah.
So let's add variant equals dev.
Cool.
And that's all we need actually to publish that schema.
Oh, excuse me.
Bless you.
Thank you. And we did it. Tag is dev. And there we go. It's under this graph.
Yep. So now we have our first one in there. Now there's some details inside of here that it prints out. Like the gateway was updated with a new schema composed from the updated account service. So it's actually telling you that it created a new configuration for that gateway. So that means there's a gateway file, like a config file that's actually available if we want to start our gateway up. It would only have the account service, but that still would be working.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Oh my goodness. I think I'm okay. This is really interesting stuff. Okay. All right.
Now, here's the quick tip. Just press the up arrow.
Oh yeah, just change all the names, right?
And just change the variant to production.
Oh, to quickly get this also out to.
Yeah. So one thing that we're going to do in the future is we're going to put all of this in a CI/CD pipeline, right? Yeah, prod's fine. All this ideally is happening in your publishing pipeline.
Right.
But you still have to initially publish all those services. So I recommend, you are going to just change those values in the CLI command, but just push to all your environment tags, all the schemas you have. And then that'll just make it to where your integration to your publishing pipelines just becomes very simple.
Yeah.
You don't have to run through and, Because what I find most teams will do is they publish to the current tag, just getting things set up, and then they move into, okay, we have these 4 environments, and then they have to run these commands over and over again.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's easier just first time to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a ton of sense. Okay, cool. So we've done those two, but now essentially we're going to do the same thing, except we just have to go through the different apps. And honestly, I think I can also just hit up again and like change some of this stuff probably faster than having
So
to
here's
type it
another
all.
little tip that I use.
Ooh.
I think it's if you use Alt on your keyboard
Uh-huh.
and then the left arrow, it'll jump in VS Code.
Oh,
And you can also
nice.
use the command key and it'll jump to the very beginning of the command line.
Ooh. Okay. Well, I knew about like command or control and jumping to the beginning and end, but I did not know about like the alt working like it does in VS Code, where like it jumps to the beginning of the next like definition or whatever. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, so this one is books. Oh my God, that's so much faster. You've just saved me so much time.
I have to do this a lot, so
Yeah.
I've tried to
Okay.
figure out.
Yeah, so we got books,
That looks
books,
good.
books. Yeah, dev, run it. Boom, it's going to be added. Then we'll do our prod. Boom. Look at this. So then I'll go up 2. So we're back on dev. And oops, next from books is products.
Yep.
Boom. Cool. Products, products, products. Dev. Run that. Look at us.
All right, let's pause after this one though, and
Okay.
let's open up the full terminal output here,
Okay.
because I think there's something that just popped up in ours. Oh no, dang it, it wasn't. Well, one thing I want to talk about, and I think it's, I had planned like the publishing order for an issue to pop up, and I guess I did that wrong. But one thing that you might see in the output of all of this is you might see composition errors. And really what that is, maybe you already defined a type in a different service and there's a name collision. It'll still push that schema into the registry, but it doesn't create a configuration file until that composition validation error is actually resolved.
So it would
You
have
might see
paused.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes I have teams get caught up and, they stop there. What I say is continue to keep pushing the other slices of the graph. One example is like if we had pushed just the reviews schema first, the one we were looking at,
But
before
not,
everything else.
yeah, it depends on, then it's going to have issues, right? Because,
Exactly.
yeah.
That type isn't actually defined yet. So all you have to do is just keep publishing all the schemas, right? So my main thing is if you have a working gateway instance with that service URLs, just having the Apollo service push with all of those endpoints will work. Just go ahead and continue to publish all of the schemas. It will end up resolving all the composition errors,
Yep.
and you'll have that configuration file get generated.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes sense too, because it's like the dependencies have to be in place. It just means you haven't pushed the graph that one relies on yet. You'll get to it, then you can circle back and push those, and should be all glorious.
Yep, exactly.
All right, awesome. Okay, cool. So, but we do still have one more, right?
Yeah, and for this one, let's still change the service name service URL for reviews. But instead of the endpoint option, why don't we try the local schema file
Okay,
option since we
cool.
have that schema.
Yeah, so let's do that. So let me go in here. So I still want to change the service URL and the name we said, right?
Yep. Yep.
Views.
And one interesting thing about the service URL too, because a lot of times I have teams ask me like, why do I have to continue to change service URL? the service URL might actually be something that changes. Let's say I'm going to let's say I even just want to rename one of these services,
Yeah.
right? The gateway, when it gets a new configuration, it actually
Oh no.
traffic that's
Okay.
delivered on the old schema.
You're there. You
And
froze for a
then,
split second.
okay.
Yeah, but you're back, so we
um,
got it. Yeah, yeah. Sorry.
cool. Um, Whenever there's a configuration change, the incoming traffic, deliver it to that old configuration, and new traffic that starts coming into the new configuration. So depending on your deployment process, everything else, you might actually have a different service URL because you want to keep that old service URL around for, I don't know, 20 minutes, whatever it may be, depending on your cycle,
Yeah.
to handle a change from a
Right.
downstream service. So that's why that option's there.
Yeah, which makes a lot of
Perfect.
sense. Yeah. Okay. And so, I think I got this right. Local schema file, right? And that's going to be reviews
Yep.
schema.graphql. Our service name is reviews. And we're still going to be at that Heroku URL for reviews. Yeah. All right, cool. So let's run this. And then we only have one more, which is prod.
Yep.
Okay.
All right. So one last thing to do before we actually jump back into Studio to check some things out.
Yep.
Why don't you run a Apollo service list, and let's set the variant to prod.
Oh, I have an Apollo update I need to do. Whoa,
All right.
cool.
So these are actually the services that make up that variant of your graph.
Wow.
And that's everything we just published up.
Yeah.
So you have some CLI commands, to quickly verify like what this is. And I think what's important here is, if you think about the development lifecycle of adding a new service in an organization of multiple teams, the dev environment might have 5 graphs where production only has 4. And the really cool thing is you had mentioned earlier in the stream how much you like that VS Code extension. And,
Yeah.
sorry for everyone on the call. The VS Code
Oh no.
graph.
You broke up right when you said the VS Code extension. Can't work with a federated?
No, it can. It does work with a federated graph.
No way.
And
That's
you can
awesome.
switch between the environments. So you could look at the environment that has an extra slice of the graph in it.
Yeah, that is wild. That's really cool. So, yeah, it's just a graph, right? Like at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Wow.
Exactly.
That's
at least
amazing.
from the client consumer data consumer standpoint,
Yeah.
where that VS extension is, it's just a graph.
Should we go take a look at what's going on now in Studio? Because I'm like curious to see what's going on.
Yeah.
Ooh, when do we get a WebStorm plugin for that? Okay. All right. We hear you. Don't worry. That's duly noted. I will add that. Seriously, I'll let the team know. All right, cool. I wonder if there's an issue for that. If not, you know what? J3D double underscore. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. I'm gonna say Jed. That could be way off, but it's always so hard to guess. All right, but anyway, long story short, +1 on that. Yeah. I would. I'm not even sure which Apollo repo.
So I think actually our tooling repo is the
Yeah.
best place. So just for everyone that's on the stream and all this stuff, the VS Code extension actually uses the language server that's built into the Apollo CLI.
Yep.
And it's kind of extended on that. I know back in the day when we first released everything, there was one engineer who's a big IntelliJ fan. And he had, some kind of like little hacky thing working on that. So it's definitely possible. Yeah, there it is.
The VS Code Apollo the VS package. Code one. Yeah, and so what would be needed? So I guess would be to open up an issue here or see if there is one for WebStorm and vote that up. It is Jed. Boom. Nailed it. Cool. Yeah. Check for an issue here. If there's not one, open it up. If you do that, share it with me, and I'll tweet it out and see who else is curious about WebStorm. Yeah. Cool. All right. So we've got this. Oh yeah. Let's jump back to Studio. Ooh. Look at
So
that.
some things popped up.
Yeah. Both of
So
our
one of the nice things
environments.
about your environments, yeah, they pop up and you get this. We don't have any traffic running yet, but you get this quick snapshot of like, what are the types, fields available, requests per minute. And as you click into that, that's really where we start to expand on, the graph running in that environment.
Yeah. Yeah, this is really cool. Okay. Boom. So let's just take a look at one of these. Well, we're not going to have like a ton of metrics coming in, but we can
Yeah.
use the Explorer, I think, here to dig through this, except we had some auth set up. So I wonder um, if that would in fact work right now. Because we don't actually
Um,
have this running anywhere, right?
yeah. Yeah. And I don't think we can have it direct at a local host because we're
Yeah,
going to run
no.
the gateway locally.
Yeah. All right, so
Uh,
we won't worry about that yet, but you do want to check out Explorer. Actually, I did a mission briefing on that with Danielle Mann. So jump on YouTube's and check that one out as well. Okay, so let's see. But we do have this. So let's go.
yeah.
Here's our services.
Yep. So this is a visual representation of really that CLI command we had there. A lot of times I like using this, especially other teams find that like, what are the fields that are exposed on specific
Yeah.
individual services, or was it this key? Was it that key? This is a quick way to be able to reference inside of like each one of those slices.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then here's our reviews schema. Very cool.
And I believe we should see the history of all these, and as each new individual federated service is pushed in inside of our version history.
Yeah, look at that. And you could get notified about changes. Pretty wild.
Yes.
There's a lot going on here. Okay, very cool. So let's see. So we've got this set up, but like didn't you say maybe we should run it locally and
Yeah.
query it? Yeah.
I think we should run it locally and set that gateway up to this. And now that we have everything published into the registry.
Yeah. So okay, cool. So what am I doing now? What's the next step here? Just run it.
Yeah. First, we got to remove that service list in the index file. So
here.
you can go and just comment that out for now.
Boop.
Now, there's
What about this?
a couple ways to do this. Let's keep that.
Okay.
Now, inside of the Apollo server constructor, if you scroll down, so we're going to need to add an option in here, or really adding in the environment variable of that Apollo key. That'll automatically configure everything.
Right.
But for our example here, we can just hard code the configuration. So there's an engine option inside of the server that we can define.
And that's an object that will take properties, correct?
Correct.
All right.
And that's where we can put API key.
Like so?
Yep.
Cool. Let me go get that.
If you were using like .env, right, you just keep it in here and define as Apollo key. That'd work. Now, here's the other thing you need to find. Remember, we talked about how each one of these are going to run at its own variant, right? So there's actually a graph variant option that we define in here. And that graph variant, we'll set it to either dev or prod. It doesn't matter for our example here. But if we didn't set it, since there isn't a configuration at that current default tag, it would start up and say, you don't have access to that because there isn't anything there yet.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. That's a little gotcha. All right. Okay, so we'll do just like dev, I guess, because we're running it locally.
Yep. Now, one thing here, I think it's actually graph variant with a capital V.
That would have got me.
Yeah, I need to talk internally a little bit about, some of those pieces because we need to make our CLI be graph variant as well.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
You're right
just
though.
to
It
make
is
it
graph variant. That's what it's saying anyway.
yeah.
Cool.
Um, so that's really all you need to do to configure the gateway to start using that managed configuration inside
Yeah.
of there. And typically that variant's probably something you're setting in the environment variables. We do have, I believe it's like Apollo underscore graph variant or all underscore variant that automatically configures to that as well.
Got it.
I find a lot of teams, build their own little logic into how this configuration happens, depending on what their needs are, local development or anything like that.
Got it. Okay, so this like just hit me. Like I get it. It's all coming full circle. So like you can have a federated API all day long, like however you want. The only thing that's different here is that we went from federated API to a managed federated API. And because of that, we no longer need the service list because we're not telling the gateway to look directly at the service list anymore to get those graphs, to get those graphs and build the schema. Instead, now we're saying no, we're going to look in Studio. We're going to look at this service and we're going to look at this particular variant of that service. And that's where you're going to get the configuration that you need to run the gateway.
Exactly. And
Boom.
to actually, before we start this up, it'll be a little more interesting. Why don't we add debug true into the Apollo gateway instance? Because one of the things it'll do now is it'll print out all those configuration changes and everything in there. That'll actually be defined in the Apollo gateway above.
Oh, in the
There is a
gateway.
debug
Oops.
true in Apollo
Yeah, yeah.
server, but
Yeah, we want this
yeah.
one. Yeah, like here, right? Yeah.
Yep,
Cool.
exactly.
Okay.
And yeah, let's start it up. I think you need to just install your packages real quick.
Yeah, yeah. I was just gonna say I'm gonna have to do that, and I don't think there's a script, but it's really just Node index.js, so it's not like
Yeah.
that big of a deal. Okay. Clear. Ah.
Oh,
Remote.
looks like I
Oh.
have a little bug error in my code. Just add that on to line 2.
Yeah. Right. Oh, that's right. It comes from here.
Yeah.
Oh no, this is faster. Boom.
Let me teach you a little trick that I have. If you
Ooh,
put
the auto
the
import.
cursor at the end of remote data source,
Yeah.
like in your definition on line 2,
Uh-huh.
and then just press comma, and then press control space.
Oh, so control spacebar will actually load up the options. Interesting. Very cool.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah. Okay.
So
Yeah,
that's
that's
one thing I
awesome.
use sometimes
Yeah, I use that in
to try and
reverse.
explore like what's available.
Yeah, I should have done it
Oh
in
yeah.
reverse. Like what I'll do, like if I take this out and I just forgot, but if you come here and you control spacebar, oh, it's weird, no suggestions, or maybe it's option spacebar.
It's
No,
control dot, I think, or control period.
maybe. I thought it was control spacebar. It used to be like, oh, import from, and then, but okay, regardless.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
Remote.
It's got like the quick fix option. And
Yeah,
you
yeah, or
import
you
it
can import
all.
from whichever packages. Yeah, yeah. But cool. I love learning VS Code shortcuts. Sorry, WebStorm folks. Okay, so let's try this again. Here we go.
Yeah,
Hey.
most of WebStorm already does that for us.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah, WebStorm does do that for you. It's like really good
Yeah.
with all that stuff. It's a real IDE.
Yeah.
Like VS Code is like you could turn it into an IDE. WebStorm is an IDE.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we are running. We are live.
Yep. So a couple things. You see that it composed the schema from the list of services that it got from the configuration. You can see the mode says managed. The service was our managed federated gateway at dev, so that environment. And then you'll notice it's doing this pinging in the background. And that's essentially looking for configuration updates to that cloud storage location which is accessible through a handshake process that happens with the API key that you define in the gateway.
Okay, I see. Awesome. And so this is because we
Right.
have debug mode on, so that's why we're seeing these pings happening. Whereas, like, this probably wouldn't be part of your
Right.
default logging. Okay, yeah.
Right. Now let's do some fun stuff and see some changes and things happen.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so why don't we open up localhost 4000 real quick? And now I want to double check this, but I believe our super secret authentication header, we need to put authorization in our HTTP headers of the
Right.
request.
Yep. Yeah, let me go grab that.
You actually can put, you don't even need that.
Oh,
It's
what?
more that our downstream user service needs this user ID set for a simple example. So the authorization value, just go ahead and put like a 1 inside of there.
For this?
Yes.
Got it. Right, because it's just the gateway you set up is just checking to see if that exists, essentially. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So normally in your gateway, you're going to get something coming in as a request that has a cookie. It
Yeah.
has, maybe an API key, an access token, and you're typically going to want to have what is the user's identity and claims, all of that.
Yep.
And you create all of that in that context function
Got it.
and
Yeah.
pass that to downstream services. So our simple example, the authorization header is the user ID.
Yeah. Nice. Cool. All right.
Uh,
Okay, so we've got that. We've got our authorization. And I guess
yeah,
we're ready to write a query.
let's write a query.
Let's see what we got going on. Let's just bring up introspection. So let's take a look at products. And we've got our
So we
edges.
have pagination built into this one.
Yeah, I saw that.
Um,
Yeah. Oops. So I'm just skipping ahead, it seems, huh? Name and its price. Cool. That should work, right? Do I
yep.
need it? Yeah, don't need to do anything
And
else.
why don't we put author on there as well?
Oh, for
Or
the like do reviews and put the author in
why
there?
don't we have it cross services? Yeah.
Yeah. Or is that a flat field? Nope. Boom. Shaboopy pulling all the datas. I probably should have specified a limit. Or is my computer freezing? There we go. Got it.
No, you come through. Yeah,
Okay,
there we
cool.
go.
There we go. Yeah, awesome. So look at this.
So yeah. So our gateway is now orchestrating across using that managed federation list. And we're able to, just like we were running the gateway service list before, or would have been, now we're managed federation.
Yeah, and we can add more in, like something coming from accounts, which is also reviews is accessing accounts, and so we can use all of this. We have a whole graph to query now, but it doesn't matter where the service originates. It's
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all just presented as a single graph. And Twitch Math, I just saw that Steve wanted it to name it Pod, but he ended up with iPod. Uh, I guess it's a joke. I'm sorry. I'm not getting. I think it's in relation to Vim versus Emacs. Oh, Emacs. I can't exit either one of those. I have no preference on Vim or Emacs. I avoid them both at all costs. Yeah.
Uh,
Okay.
I usually get stuck in Vim.
Yeah. Exactly. That's what I'm saying. I can't exit it. Like it's like command or colon WQ. But what if you don't want to write? What if you just want to quit? I don't know. I don't know. I tried to learn
Yeah.
Vim, and you like really have to dedicate time to it because your productivity drops to like basically zero when you're first starting out. And then
Yeah,
I'm sure it's super fast if you get really good at it, but it takes a lot.
it does. Absolutely.
All right.
Um, One real quick thing.
Oh no.
So we execute some queries. The gateway will actually print out when we have debug set to true,
Oh,
each query plan inside of the console.
very cool. Oh wow, look at this.
So this is why I said throw in the reviews, because you can actually see the order sequence of how it's going to send each request
Yeah.
and what data it's going to send along with that.
Yeah, so let's look at this one, which had, I believe, the reviews included with it. Which one was it? Yeah, here we go.
Yep.
Yep. This is wild. Look at how it's putting together these paths. And then, so this
Yep.
is,
And that's all based off of those directives of
yeah,
federation that we define in our schema.
so very cool. Man, GraphQL never stops impressing me.
What's really nice too with the Apollo Gateway, one of the things that we work with a lot of our enterprise customers on, what are things we need to tweak or change, fix, help with the community, make sure this is performing properly. So every time an incoming operation comes in, a query plan is generated for that.
Yeah.
But there's actually a cache built into Apollo Gateway. So if multiple of the same requests were coming through, it would actually use a cache version of that query plan. So you really only get that hit on the first request.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that would, yeah, which makes sense. So I guess whatever caching strategy you have set up, um, yeah, like you'll only take the hits wherever, you know, whenever the caching expires, essentially.
Yeah, and there's a lot of little performance things built into Apollo Gateway, right, around that. But for example, I have a lot of people ask me, should I run a Apollo Gateway inside of a serverless infrastructure?
Right.
And we definitely want to get to a point where we support that, and it works great. But there are some performance considerations
Mm-hmm.
around, how do you do caching in that? So in our current state today, we typically recommend running Apollo Gateway on a dedicated piece of infrastructure so you can make use of the cache and
Yep.
everything. But we definitely have plans at running all this at the edge in the future.
Okay. Very interesting. So, I don't want to derail us too far, but I do have like things on that. So, I think serverless might be okay as long as there's really good caching within the GraphQL APIs themselves, but that like shifts the burden, right? Like, yeah, you have to make sure you're being very responsible with data access within the API so that it's okay for your APIs to have a higher hit rate. And then I also wonder if like they're downstream services, but could um, those also have CDNs in front of them that know how to behave. Um, and like
Mhm.
that's what you specify as the service URL for the gateway. And those seem like they could be possible options if somebody was that invested in going serverless.
Yeah, and I think that's usually where a lot of the discussions of where my team and the solutions architectures at Apollo will work with
Yeah.
various teams on what does that look like, because the details really come down to what are you hosted in. A
Yeah.
lot of people are using things like Kubernetes, but a lot of teams in the serverless world maybe use AWS, maybe Azure Functions.
Yeah.
Maybe they're trying to use something else like within a Fastly's environment. There's just a lot of details in there
Yeah.
that it's fun to get into, to be
Yeah,
honest.
for sure. Yeah, those are definitely fun conversations to have. Speaking of, aren't we currently looking for solutions architect at Apollo? If somebody was interested in having those
We are.
conversations. Yeah.
We are. We have a couple roles open up in my group in the solutions architecture team. Uh, you are our careers page, or you can feel free. It's Watson at apollographql.com. Watson like Sherlock Holmes and Watson books.
Nice.
And I'm happy to help out or point anyone in the right direction.
Very cool.
Or
Yeah,
even just talk
awesome.
about the role more.
Yeah, right? Yeah. Yeah, well, I just dropped that link in the chat, so everyone's got it. Is there anything else you want to cover or talk about as far as Federation goes? Any other thoughts, or is there anything else that we should take a look at? I mean, I feel like I've got this now. I
Yeah.
understand how this works. This is awesome, but I just, was there anything else that you wanted to add to this?
Yeah, I think there's just one other thing we'd want to add into this, and it's really around understanding what's going on here. And Studio provides actually a trace understanding for all the metrics of our graph.
Right.
So maybe the last query we just created inside of Studio.
Yeah, let's do that. So you broke up for a sec, but I got you. You were saying the last thing we want to do is like look at those traces, and Um, did you freeze again? My internet is getting pretty bad. I think we're starting to drop. Yeah. Oh, I think I lost everyone. Well, that's not good.
Did the stream just drop?
It did not. I think it's holding on. I think we're okay. You're back. Everything is back, but my
Oh, cool.
internet just like pretty much dropped completely. Hopefully the stream is still there. I'm gonna check. It
Yeah.
says reconnecting. We might have dropped. Right at the end. I thought we were gonna make it.
Yeah. It's all good.
I don't know how to get it. It says reconnecting, but I just want it to. Okay, we are live again. Sorry about that. Dropped frames, bad connection, and I lost internet. So, what Michael was saying right before we got disconnected is like we have this tracing on. We have these streams. We've actually run some queries. Let's see what that looks like inside of Studio. Is that a?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's click on the Operations tab.
Uh-oh.
We were running in the dev mode, so we need to switch to our dev tag.
Yeah, good call.
Yeah, that variant will separate the metrics out for you, so it's a nice way to filter.
Yeah, which makes sense. And boom, now here we go. Oh, I love this. Wow, I'm like having flashbacks from when I was at Major League Soccer. I used to come in here all the time. I'd be like, oh, P95, we were doing good.
Yeah. Actually, I remember working with the Major League Soccer team when I first started on the cache rate.
Yeah.
Your team had was awesome.
Yeah.
It's always above 90%.
That's awesome. Yeah. All right, cool. So let's see. Yeah, so we've got our requests coming in, right? Like, yeah, we don't expect there to be a ton of them.
Yep.
Because we only fired off a few, but we've got that. We've got our latency. Walk me a little bit through this. What do we got going on here? Whoa.
Yeah, so these are distribution maps that are essentially giving you breakdowns of all the operations of your graph. So think of this as like each one of these graphs is all of the performance of that graph.
Okay.
If you open that little triangle filter, I don't know how to call that button, in the top right though.
There we go.
That opens our filters, and you can kind of see how we have multiple different requests inside there. The introspection query is obviously returning super fast because the gateway's locally. But let's click on one of the big query. Yeah, that one. So this is actually driving into those same graphs, but into that specific operation.
Got it.
So we're able to start seeing, what the overall response time is. So ours was 15.2 seconds here. That's not great. We got some work to do, but let's see if we have a trace. Click on that traces tab. So,
I'm on the free plan.
This is where we have to go to the next tier. But for purposes today, why don't you navigate to demo.apollo.dev.
Oh, right.
This is actually like our little example that has that same gateway with managed federation running, and it has some metrics that we can open. So let's open up the prod tag of a Cephi.
Okay, so here's the Cephi.
Oh, production, sorry, not prod.
Yeah, yeah. There we go. Cool. And then we're going to go to operations. All right. And then we'll just pick one. Let's do web, my reviews. Cool. Oh, wow.
There we go.
There we go. Oh, it's so much prettier when there's more data too.
Yeah. So now you can start seeing a distribution of like, where were some really high requests? What is our overall P90 what? And you can kind of drag around on these charts and they all interact together as like one bar line.
Yeah. It's very interesting. And then now we can go in talking about the traces, and we can look at the execution along the path of the resolvers, which
correct.
Oh, this feature alone is just like, it's like so amazing.
Yep. Yeah. And this is where, you saw that query plan that was generated in the gateway and all that execution stuff. This is really the tracing timing data that each federated service is returning to the gateway in that response. And this is the visualization of that.
Yeah. Which is really cool because you can see like, okay, like we might be like, well, it's kind of hard to well, I guess you could cache user data for a little bit, but like, yeah, you might be able to find places where you can improve caching, do all kind of things. Look at what might be taking resolvers to figure out what might be taking them longer than you expect for them to resolve.
Yep. Exactly.
Boom.
Now, you also notice those little entities things. That underscore entity is actually what's defined in federation. So whenever it makes requests out to those federated services, they are entities in that data execution response.
Right.
But you notice how the details are in there.
Right. Yeah, like it's looking up the data and it's telling you what service, so you know immediately where this is coming from. So we had a question. Is this demo URL available for anybody?
Yes. Yeah. Let's why don't we take the invite link for this organization and drop it into this
Sure. How do I do
channel? That? If you click they just changed this. How do you get back to the organization? Do you click on that example code?
Yeah, I think so. Here.
Yeah.
Yeah. It did just.
Oh, I'm sorry. You have to be in the graph, and it's under the graph settings.
Okay, so a Cephi.
Or is it that different? Or is it because I'm an admin in a Cephi?
Oh, maybe I can't do it.
Yeah, maybe I'll have to give you.
That's personal URL. Settings. Yeah. Well, I dumped the link in chat. See if that works for you. Just demo.apollo.dev. If you create an account, it might just add you. Okay, so Jed tried the link above and it worked. So demo.apollo.dev just gets you.
Oh, it did work.
Yeah.
Perfect. I thought we had created something to where like anyone who goes there, they automatically get added.
Yeah.
Yeah. Perfect.
Cool. Yeah. So now
I'm glad we confirmed.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. We'll do it live. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. So take a look around, and then this is cool too, because like if you want to show, you're trying to get buy-in. Sometimes it's hard. You can walk them through and say, look, this is exactly what we get. So it's very cool. It's a great demo. Yeah, this is awesome. Anything else? Is there anything else we want to cover?
I mean, the last thing I'd say about Managed Federation, everything you saw what we did today is actually available on the free tier, the Community Edition with Apollo. It's really, once you want to start looking at those traces, those individual traces, using those individual traces to perform schema validation, which you can imagine, just like how we have that push command for each one of those services, we have a check command where it actually takes a difference of that proposed schema and then replays it against all of those traces and gives you a finite report of, hey, this breaks or this doesn't break.
That's really wild. So you could be like, oh, we want to make this change. let's see what will be affected out of the history of what we've already had come into the graph.
Correct.
Wow.
So this is really how, when you think of how does team A make a change to their schema,
Yeah.
when make sure they don't break everyone else's as far as a composition for the gateway, and also make sure they don't break traffic that's running live in production,
Yeah.
right? You want to keep all of those different clients as graph consumption increases across the organization. You don't want to break your end consumers in any of that. So this is tooling to really power and enable that. Now the schema validation, that's where you get into the paid tier
Yeah.
on Teams
Yeah.
or above. But all you need is just one user, one seat to do any of that.
Yeah.
And you can check all that out on the 14-day trial as well.
Cool. Very cool. Awesome. Well, I super appreciate this walkthrough. I learned a lot today. I hope everyone who joined us on the stream learned a lot. And as always, these streams are available on Twitch afterwards. I'll also take them and download them and upload them to the Apollo GraphQL YouTube. And there are lots of other streams. Fun fact, I'll actually be streaming twice today. So if you are so inclined, drop back by 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific, 9 a.m. Australian, where I'll be joined by another Michael Compton. We're going to take a look at /GraphQL, which is dgraph's platform for managed hosted dgraph databases, which is really cool. It pairs very nicely with Apollo. So yeah, I'm excited to take a look at
Absolutely.
that. Yeah, should be fun. So all right, thanks again for joining us, Michael. Thank you again, everyone, for watching. And I guess with that, we'll say goodbye. I'm just we'll peace out of here. Later, everyone.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It's been great. Bye, everybody.